Welcome to People Don't Think. Let's Start Today, a podcast hosted by Norb Svanascini, founder of AmericanEagle.com, and Al Edwards. Norb, great to see you again. You look like $1 million.
Well, thank you. I wish I had some of that in my pockets, but that's good. You know, I like to start the day by thanking for this gift we get. That's why they call it the present.
That's right.
And it's a nice day. It's the beginning of fall and feels really good.
That's awesome.
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, folks, I would be remiss if I did not mention that just about 4 days ago or so, Norb had his birthday. So happy birthday to you, Norb.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, today's topic is something that we came up with last time, I should say. And the title of this podcast is Recordings and Books That Can Change Your Life. And, you know, I was listening to Zig Ziglar, which I do a lot, and we'll talk about that, like Audible and different things you can listen to in your car. But he said that motivation is not permanent, just like bathing is not permanent. You have to do it, hopefully every day, for it to continue on. And he said he always used to get a kick out of people who would come up to him and say, you know, Zig, when I get down, I pop one of your CDs or tapes or whatever it is in the car and it brings me back up. And he said, well, do you let your car run out of gas before you go get a refill, or do you notice that it's a quarter tank and you're going to go fill it up? And his point there, of course, is that you should always take steps to stay up, continue to be motivated instead of going down into the trenches and then trying to pull out of it again.
And don't pull, you know, the thing that you run out of gas.
Exactly.
And you know, it's kind of funny because it's very, very true. It's just like when we talked about hydrating your brain. You know, you have to hydrate your brain just like you have to hydrate your body. And thinking positively is the key, whether you use the analogy of putting gas in your car or hydrating your body, it works. You will never be 100% positive, so you have to keep working at it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with that said, we're going to talk about some recordings and books that have meant a lot to both Norb and myself. Many of these, actually, Norb introduced me to a number of years ago. Some of these go way back, so I wanted to give our audience, who might be a little on the younger side, an opportunity to hear these book titles and recording titles, so you can go out and, in the spirit of keeping your gas tank full, you can go out and seek these things out. But of course, we always want you to listen to our podcast. This is now number 9, so we're really on a roll here. This is fantastic.
Yeah, you can fill the diamond.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, right.
The first recording that we want to start with, of course, really was the inspiration for our podcast, and that was a recording done in 1956 by a great guy named Earl Nightingale, and it was called The Strangest Secret. And when I was about 16 years old, Norb gave me an actual LP copy, and I've talked about this before, but gave me an LP copy of The Strangest Secret, and I started listening to it. And even though the record hasn't changed, the recording hasn't changed, I hear new things all the time because I've changed as a person. So Norb, tell us about The Strangest Secret and how you came to know about it.
Well, you know, I started actually selling insurance when I was about 24, 25 years old. And the insurance business had a really good trait, which included on a weekly basis a company meeting where you just listen to positive mental attitude records. And there were a lot of them that were very good. A lot of them were very influential in my life. But the one that really, really drove the point was The Strangest Secret. From the first time I heard it, it just made so much sense that it just has remained for the rest of my life. In fact, I don't know how many times I've heard it. I don't think I'm exaggerating if I say thousands. And I still listen to it because it's just a phenomenal record and speech. Probably as good a speech as I've ever heard. You know, I have some favorite things that I really like. Kipling wrote a poem called The If, which he gave to his son on his 16th birthday. Unluckily, you know, in this age of people calling things sexist, some lady said that at the end it says, and then you will be a man, my son. But he wrote it for his son, and the people that complain about it being manly, so to speak, don't realize that if it was a girl, he could have changed it to, and someday you'll be a lady, my daughter.
Right.
So it's a very important thing to remember. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. If you haven't read read it. It's called The If. It'll take you about 3 minutes to read. It's fantastic. That and The Strangest Secret is probably the two things in my life that really changed it, and obviously, hopefully for the better, because it kept me in a positive manner, even with the ups and downs that life brings. But those two things have really maintained the boat on the right course.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I also sold insurance for a long time, so there must be some sort of thing there of old insurance guys listening to all these old recordings and stuff like that. But that's awesome. And as I said, Earl Nightingale was the author of this. He was a commentator and a radio personality. I mentioned this in an early podcast. He was also a survivor of the USS Arizona at Pearl Harbor, which he never really talked about, but that's certainly an interesting thing. The guy who wrote the quintessential recording on positive thinking survived Pearl Harbor, kind of thing. And what is the strangest secret? In essence, what he talks about, the point he gets to, is the strangest secret is that we become what we think about. And that's strange because for some reason, nobody seems to know that.
Yeah, they don't get it.
They don't teach it in school. They don't have it on billboards. You don't see it on TV commercials. But the strangest secret is you become what you think about.
Yeah, and it's kind of very interesting. We talked about the brain being like the soil, and whatever you plant in your brain is the same effect that whatever you plant on the soil is. But one of the other things that the strangest secret had that I really like, I don't think we've talked about this one before, is that in life you have to pursue a goal, and the goal is very important because it doesn't matter what the goal is. That just gives you a purpose in life. And he compared it to a ship that, whenever a ship's in the harbor, they actually know where they want to go, and they plan the trip, how to get there, how to navigate. And if that ship didn't have a plan or a goal to get out of even the harbor, it wouldn't even get out of the harbor. It would probably crash and just stay there. So, humanity and life is a lot like that. You have to have a purpose. You have to have something that you want to achieve. Now, if you have a goal, which I think, you should aim to do it, you have to be positive about it. You have to believe that, this goal can be achieved, because if you believe it, it will happen. It's just a mathematical certainty.
For sure. And I remember that part about The Strangest Secret where he talks about that. If you just start the engines and let it go, it probably will not even make it out of the harbor.
Exactly.
Sink or hit something. But that's a great analogy. I mean, when we get in our cars, usually we have a plan, a destination, a goal. Like, I'm going to come to Des Plaines here at AmericanEagle.com today. Well, and I knew what roads to take and what highways to get off of and all that stuff. And really, when it boils down to it, life is really not that much more complicated, is it?
No, it isn't. And it's just a set of goals, whatever you do. I mean, you eat your lunch and you know where you're going to go, whether you stay home or you go to a restaurant and you order. And basically that's what life is. It's a mini goals, if you want to call them. But that's how we live. Even to the point that when you go to bed at night, you go to bed at 10:30, you watch a little television or you read. But, that's your aim, your goal is to go to sleep.
Right.
So
absolutely. Now, Earl Nightingale did record over the years many versions of The Strangest Secret, but I happen to love, and this is because Norb gave me the original recording, the 1956 recording is available on YouTube. And I really recommend that. You don't even have to pay for it. You can go on YouTube and listen to The Strangest Secret. But I really recommend the original 1956 recording, and you'll be able to, when you Google that, you'll be able to tell it to play the original one for you. So I'd recommend that for sure. If you want more Earl Nightingale, he also did of course, I'm dating myself a little bit. I have a 6 CD book of something called Lead the Field by Earl Nightingale. And basically it's just 6 whole CDs, several hours of this same philosophy about thinking about how you want your life to be, and how thinking and positive actions and thoughts will change everything. That is also available on Audible. I just noticed that the Lead the Field series is available on Audible. I spend a lot of time in my car driving, so I listen to Audible all the time. That's why I listen to Zig Ziglar and Wayne Dyer and Earl Nightingale and all these kind of guys. So if you're interested in more Earl Nightingale, Lead the Field is really a great program.
Yeah, and the interesting part about that is that when you think about it, this Earl Nightingale, who had a radio show, he was very, very popular out of Chicago. This is 70 years old now, and it's as fresh and as enlightening as it was back then. And now, some things might seem old-fashioned when he says them, and some things might not conform to today's accepted standards, but nothing offensive or anything. But the guts of it's just like watching Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which is probably about the same age and has the same impact on everybody when they watch it, or It's a Wonderful Life. These are things that are timeless. So don't get hung up that it has to be modern to be good. It's still modern. Some things never change. And that's very, very important to remember. Don't just throw it away because it's older.
Yeah, that's a great point. He does mention, back then in the 50s, the language was much more male dominated. So he'll say men or he or whatever, but it's just as applicable to women as it is men. And it never went away. The significance of it, the meaning of it, is because the human experience has never changed. The human life has never changed, and these principles will be eternal.
Absolutely. And that's something that's very interesting because we all think that this is a new era and we're different. Or, I always get a kick out of people saying that, well, I don't want to do this to my kid, because, they'll learn. They're a lot smarter than what they used to be. And I always think, I hate to say this because it doesn't sound good, but we're basically animals. And that kid is not any smarter than a kid that was born, 1,500 years ago. And you got to teach that kid. One of the interesting things is that my father told me something that I've never forgotten. I grew up in an era where I had to say please and thank you. And if I didn't say it, my parents would correct me. They'd say, well, what's the magic word? And say thank you and please. And a fact, and this has been proven, by the way, is that you have to tell a child 2,000 times to say that before he does it automatically.
Wow.
So it's kind of an interesting thing that, whenever I hear a kid, which is not that often anymore, unluckily, say thank you, I always tell the parents, God, you told that kid 2,000 times to say thank you. And, it's true.
And that may have been the 2010th time. And
Yeah,
you just
exactly.
were on the right side of that equation. Right?
And again, that goes into a goal. I mean, the goal of that parent was to have that child say please or thank you. It doesn't just happen. He or she, the mother, had the goal of having that child say things that they believe it's a polite way to conduct yourself. So,
Absolutely.
I'm very, very, I was always very impressed by that. So always remember, whoever's listening, that we're really animals. We got to be trained. So
That's right.
don't be ashamed of it.
That's right. The next book that I want to talk about is one that I think also had a huge impact on Norb, and that was the classic Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And to give you some background, it came out, I believe, in 1936, and it sold millions and millions and millions of copies. It's still in print today. The idea behind it basically was that the old steel magnate, Andrew Carnegie, hired this young reporter, Napoleon Hill. He sent him out with introduction letters to some of the most famous people in the world, Henry Ford and captains of industry and all these people that had made incredible successes. And he said, I want you to go study these people, and I want you to come back and put it together in a book. And that was in a series originally called The Law of Success, which I've seen around you for many, many years.
I have one on my desk, yes.
Yeah. And the book Think and Grow Rich came out of that a little bit. So what did the law of success and Think and Grow Rich mean to you, Norb?
Well, it's kind of interesting because, Think and Grow Rich shouldn't be taken as rich as far as money is
Exactly.
concerned.
I was just going to say that.
It's just being rich in life and enjoy life. I mean, some of the happiest people I've ever met, money to them didn't mean that much. I'm not saying that money is irrelevant in life. I think, but you really don't need all the things we accumulate, especially in this country. When you think about, 100, 120, 130 years ago, if people would just have enough money to feed themselves, they were happy. But today we live in a country where we have way, way too many things that we really don't need. And I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm saying that you don't need to be so-called rich and where money is the most important thing. It's just rich in what you've achieved in life. Some people might just have a goal to be the president of Rotary, and when they become that, they're very happy and they're rich because they feel this is what they like to do. So success is really the success of whatever you want to do through a positive mental attitude,
For sure. And that ties in exactly with this little summary of Think and Grow Rich that I found on the internet. It says, Napoleon Hill examines the psychological power of thought and the brain in the process of furthering your career for both monetary and personal satisfaction. Originally published in 1936, this is one of the all-time self-help classics, and it's a must-read for anyone who's looking to improve their lives. And I believe, like I said, I think it sold about 15 million copies, and it's still very much in print.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's a Napoleon Hill association, which I believe it's in northern Indiana someplace, and they're very successful.
Yeah.
And there is a big following for that. What we talk about here, I hope the people that listen to this podcast realize that we really are trying to improve everybody's life by doing this, because Norman Vincent Peale, who was also one of the big promoters of positive mental attitude, success through positive mental thinking, he wrote, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say hundreds of books, and he was a preacher on Fifth Avenue, and he was also a big guy on TV. One of the things about America when TV first started, it was full of people that just reeked positiveness, and Norman Vincent Peale was one of them. But he said something that I'd really like to share with you, which is something: when you expect the best, you release a magnetic force in your mind, which by law of attraction tends to bring the best to you. And please notice that it doesn't say the best in you, it says the best to you, which is another thing about positive mental attitude. You become attractive to people when you're positive. And not that I want to be attractive by saying this, but, you do. It's just part of life. When you see somebody that's happy, you want to be around that person because it makes you happy. And if you have somebody that's not happy and wants to tell you his or her troubles, you basically want to try away from them, unless you have somebody that you think is a worse problem, and then you want to share that. and you should actually reprogram that part of your life. But it's incredible how all these things are really very, very important in your life to remember.
I think that really is a spiritual principle. I just heard this beautiful quote again that I've heard before, but you get back what you put out in the world. It really seems like a magnetic force. And I was just listening to a thing on the Audible, and someone said, if you go out looking for a friend, they're very hard to come by. But if you go out to be a friend, you'll find them everywhere.
That's beautiful. It really is. And life is really not that hard if you're just nice. And it sounds corny. And, we live in an era where everybody's highly educated. They have all these degrees and they make things very complex. But it isn't that hard. Just be nice. And I really am a firm believer in the golden rule. And if you treat people like you want to be treated, you will not believe how nice people are. I've been very fortunate that I've traveled all over the world, and people would say, God, you're going to this place and you don't know the language. I never had any trouble. I mean, I only met in many, many travels. I can remember maybe a couple of people that were nasty to me because they're probably just nasty that they can't help it. But otherwise, when you're nice to people and you ask questions, everybody's nice. And it's what you say. It's just a mathematical formula. Just be nice.
It really is. You get back in life what you put out. So if you're a loving, giving, a kind person who cares about other people, they will respond not equally, but probably twice or three times as more as you, because people appreciate it so much, because it's so rare today. Probably always rare, but particularly today, for people to take the time to care about someone or ask how you doing or anything like that.
Yeah. And, you mentioned Andrew Carnegie that actually employed
Napoleon Hill.
Yeah. He had a great quote, Carnegie, which I also want to read to you, which is really, really interesting. And by the way, that last Norman Vincent Peale quote was given to me by my grandson, who actually listens to these podcasts, and he really likes it.
Oh, so he's the one that listens.
Yeah, he's the one that listens.
Oh, okay, good. I was wondering who it was.
One guy. And he also gave me another one about Carnegie. Actually, Carnegie wrote this. He says, perhaps the most tragic thing about mankind is that we are all dreaming about some magical garden over the horizon, instead of enjoying the roses that are right outside. And, when you think about that, it's really true. I mean, the last podcast, I think I really am proud because we talked about a lot of things about seeing flowers in the alleys that were dirty, but the flower was something to admire. And this goes back to that. I think that we have to learn how to be thankful and admire the good things in life. And all these books about positive mental attitude that we're talking about basically drive that point.
Couldn't be more true. And, by the way, folks, I don't think we're suggesting you go out and read every one of these books, because I think a lot of them are similar themes. And you could, if you certainly wanted to. It wouldn't hurt you. It would help you a great deal. But if you wanted to focus on one or a couple of them, I think you'd be great. So don't think we have to send you off with 6 or 7 books you need to read. By the way, I just want to point out again, most of these books are now on Audible or on audio, so you could listen to them instead of having to sit down and read them, which is really great. The next book has a Chicago tie-in. It's called Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude. And that was written by Napoleon Hill again, and an old famous insurance guy named W. Clement Stone. And most of our readers are not going to, most of our listeners, I should say, are not going to know who W. Clement Stone was, but he was the founder of the Combined Insurance Company out of Chicago. Very poor kid, had nothing, started this little insurance company and grew into be, a multi-millionaire, and he's long gone and everything. But W. Clement Stone was a big name in the business world for many, many years. And he and Napoleon Hill got together and wrote this book in about 1960 called Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude. And basically the whole idea of it, again, is that, you want to become a success magnet by learning how to develop a positive mental attitude. They teach in there that problems are nothing more than opportunities. And by using auto-suggestion to bind your goals to your self-conscious and make accomplishing them second nature. And I think self-consciousness is nothing more than self-talk. We talked about that last time, about what you say about yourself is going to come true, whether that be negative or positive. It's the same coin.
Yeah, and basically goes back by the statement of the one I just wrote about Norman Vincent Peale, that you release a magnetic force through positive thinking. But what he doesn't say is that you basically exude, if that's a correct word, negative forces when you don't have that positive vibe. So people run away from you as successfully as how they come towards you when you are positive.
Exactly. It's the same coin.
Yeah, Clement Stone was a really interesting guy. He actually started selling insurance, and for the audience here that is not as old as Al and Al is not that old, by the way, but they used to have what's called a weekly insurance policy, and when people didn't have a lot of money, they had just enough money to pay for the funeral expenses. And you had these men, and they were men at that time, that would go from home to home and collect on a weekly basis as little as 20 cents, 30 cents. And this was a way that, the average worker who didn't have a lot of disposable income would have enough money to pay for the funeral expenses. And the insurance was $1,000 or $2,000. And Clement Stone built one of the largest insurance companies doing that. That was a combined insurance company. And he helped a lot of people because a lot of these people, to them, this was very important to have money to pay for their funeral. So he served a purpose, but he was always a big contributor to, being positive about life. And he built a lot of stuff, did a lot of really good things. A very interesting man, by the way, if you want to read about him. W. Clement Stone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right here out of Chicago.
Yeah.
Well, in our last few minutes, the last book that we want to talk about is a great book called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And again, that was written in the 1930s. And, just another classic. I always tell people I always like these old classics because I think they do them better than anyone can do them today. The tenets of this book were to basically help people understand the importance of things like, when you're talking to someone, begin with praise and honest appreciation when you start talking to them. Call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. Talk about your own mistakes before criticizing another person. Ask questions instead of giving orders. Let the other person save face in embarrassing situations. Praise every improvement. Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Use encouragement, make the fault seem easy to correct, and make the other person happy about doing what you suggest. These are just little, honest, sincere ways to be an effective communicator and a person who cares about others and wants to help other people.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because a lot of people think that you don't do this naturally. But after you do this stuff, I kind of like it because you become very sincere about really, like, Al is wearing a shirt today, and I wish I could say, gee, Al, what a nice shirt. That isn't the case, by the way, but it isn't a bad-looking shirt. But, it's just a nice thing to tell somebody.
I got this shirt from you, though. That's the sad part,
okay. Yeah. It was cheap. The main thing is that if you just, when you meet somebody, or even, there's a lot of interesting things today because, and we touched on this subject before, there's no money in simplicity. And I think that one of the great things about this era of positive mental attitude in the United States is that there weren't many psychiatrists and psychologists. So when somebody like Norman Vincent Peale said something positive, or, Think and Grow Rich by Earl Nightingale, he said, just do the right thing, or all these guys. One of the things that today you have 20 psychiatrists criticizing you to say this, life isn't that easy, and these are the problems, and you don't know what, when he was a child, he was molested, so, this is why he's not happy. And, and we've all had rough times when we were children, all of us, there's no one that had two perfect parents. I mean, I had two very nice parents, but, I had my little problems sometimes with them, and everybody does. But You don't dwell on those. You remember the good things, whatever they might be. And if they weren't good, and if you did have a misfortune of having bad parents, which I'm sure somebody does, is, just forget about it and say, okay, that was, part of my life. I'm not going to repeat that with my children. That's the way to think positively. You have a track record of what not to do with your children. I always try to copy. I had a wonderful father, but he had a couple of things I didn't like. And with my children, I duplicate the things I liked with them, but I never do what I didn't like, what he did to me. And, that's thinking positive. I'm not criticizing my dad. I just didn't like the way he did a couple of things, so I don't do them. And I think that life is very, very important. I just want to say one thing that I wrote down, little jotting, that I think one of the keys to being happy is to learn how to think by yourself. It's okay to listen to people, but don't make it a habit to listen to everybody unless they make you a more positive and wealthier person. And I don't mean wealthy monetarily, wealthy as far as your persona goes. And, because today we have experts in every field. And, I grew up in southern Indiana, and at a time where a lot of old guys that were my age used to tell me things that I never forgot. But one of them was the definition of an expert. And the guy came to me and says, you know what an expert is? And I said, no. And I was a young kid. He says, an expert is a guy you don't know that lives 20 miles away. And, it's kind of funny because today you turn on the TV and you have all these experts explaining complicated things that are very, very simple. So do your own research. Don't be afraid to, when you hear an expert, you say, well, is this guy or is this woman right? I mean, or does she have this PhD from some fancy school and this is the way, she thinks that she's making a difference, and maybe she's nuts, or he's nuts. So forget about expert opinions. There's no substitute for doing your own research, especially in things that really matter to you. Now, it doesn't mean that the expert is wrong. It doesn't mean that at all. But make sure that you verify it yourself. And this is a 2,200-year-old thing that really also influenced my life tremendously. And it was something that Socrates said. And Socrates said, don't just believe something because somebody tells you something. Make sure it passes your own intellect. And if it doesn't pass your intellect, discard whatever we were told and keep the things that passes your intellect. You must consider the actual theories that are presented to you for yourself. So remember that. That's something that's very, if I can recommend something that you should do is, just because somebody tells you, don't believe it. In fact, don't even believe what Al and I tell you. Listen to the things we recommend to you. And if you think that they won't help you, we don't mind if you tell us, but we hope it does. But, you should listen to what we're recommending. And, maybe you say, maybe these two guys got something, So I hope it does.
Absolutely. Well, friends, we're at the end of another podcast. But as always, I think the point here is that we're trying to, in our own lives and trying to help other people, just realize that your thoughts make up your life, and what you think about, you get. So just to repeat it, whether you listen to The Strangest Secret or the books Think and Grow Rich, Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude, or How to Win Friends, Influence People, or all of them together, we hope that you'll get something out of them. So Norb, thank you so much as always.
Thank you. And one thing that I want to leave this podcast with is that happiness often comes from within. Learn how to tame negative thoughts and approach every day with optimism. And believe me, you will be happier. So thank you.
I love that. So for Norb Svanascini, this is Al Edwards. We'll see you next time. And as Norb always says, every day is a gift. That's why they call it the present. We'll see you next time. Thank you.